avem un moment.
Este ultimul moment de astăzi, Doru, și am să te rog să mă ajuți.
Este un film pe care ni l-a trimis Perry Timms, care ar fi trebuit să ajungă astăzi, de fapt, alaltăieri, dar viața câteodată ne oferă surprize. Am mai avut câteva surprize. Un invitat și-a primit un tir în spatele mașinii, o altă invitată, în fine, sunt de ale noastre, nu contează, dar și Perry Timms a avut o problemă majoră de familie și, din nefericire, nu a mai și-a anulat absolut tot ce avea de făcut, dar a venit către noi cu o prezentare special făcută și în exclusivitate pentru Great People Inside, o prezentare de 15 minute, după care vom încheia cu ultimii doi invitați, cărora vreau să le mulțumesc în mod deosebit, pentru că nu este deloc ușor să vorbești în a doua zi după masa de prânz. Mă înclin.
Good morning, and thank you for joining me to look at the future of HR. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but thought I would bring you at least this filmed version of me and what I see as the future. So I'm Perry Timms, I'm the founder and Chief Energy Officer of People and Transformational HR Limited, a certified B Corporation, and very proud to be the #1 most influential thinker in HR for 2022. So I'm going to look at the future for us, and I'm going to help you understand what potentially could be a new model for HR. So let's have a look at some of that. But before we do, we need to think about the world we're operating in. The World Economic Forum recently declared a state of polycrisis. When we think about all of the conflict and all of the challenges in the world of work, advancing technology, economic fragility, we are in a period of intensity, complexity, and turbulence. So that world, I think, is something we didn't expect, but we have to deal with. And by we, it's everybody in the world of work, but particularly us in people, culture, and learning. One of the things we could probably do with is a little look back before we look ahead. So here's the kind of HR history lesson. And then we can see that we started as a kind of worker welfare-based approach. We're going back to the sort of industrial era and the emergence into large corporations, and it was felt that workers needed protective rights and workers needed support because of the sort of early days of capitalism and commerce. We saw that develop a little further into the state of personnel. So this was where we started to bring in more policies and contracts and regulations. And from personnel, we moved into HR in the 1980s and the 1990s. I guess spearheaded by the US and globally sort of recognized. The human resources profession has kind of been the shorthand for people, culture, learning and organization development for quite some time. We then saw us move into people and culture, and there's something about the state of people and culture that I think we recognise for now. We are much more attuned to not just the systemic and mechanistic side of work, but also the spiritual and emotional side of work, motivation, engagement, those kind of factors. And really, we've almost gone full circle because after a pandemic and all sorts of economic fragility and the climate emergency and some of the other multiplicity of problems that we see in the world, we're back into looking after people, but also balancing performance, so well-being, care and support. So that's really where we've gotten to in a sort of historical sense. And so really we're seeing some turnings in how HR is developing through the ages. But just to give us a sense of now, the predominant model that HR teams work to, normally of any kind of size or construct and different dynamics, is this one, the HR business partner model or the Ulrich model, built by Professor Dave Ulrich from the University of Michigan. And we know the parts that this plays in the whole scheme of things. So we have shared service support, operational, administrational, contractual, functional, supportive, and enabling work. And then we have centres of excellence, pay modelling, reward and recognition, learning and development, organisation design, employee relations, and so on. So people who are real specialists in areas that we call HR. And then the business partners who connect business leaders and teams and divisions and functions with very specialist roles to play in the world of work to the people agenda, so that they are compliant, so that they are enabling, so that they are supportive, and they make the most of the talented people around them. So that's been the predominant model for some time. But as you can see from this slide, we've had this with us for approaching 30 years. And maybe that turbulent world needs and calls for a different type of HR model. Now let's zoom into this for a bit, because in 2017 and then repeat in 2021, I had the honour of writing a book, Transformational HR. Now in it, I wanted to project a potential adaptation to that HR model that we've just looked at. So instead of 3 elements, 4 zones, instead of names and titles that may not mean much to business leaders, much more distinct and focal points of parts of the employee life cycle, of the ways of working and the organisation's needs from its people and talent. So we can see a few examples in here. Concentrating on business analytics, concentrating on the learner experience, concentrating on people intelligence, concentrating on employee relations, concentrating on diversity and inclusivity, all with an additional element of looking at the future. So we've got a zone here that looks at people and organisational transformation. So I brought that into the thinking, I guess, in 2017, 2021. And let's just say there are some companies who have taken this on, and there are probably companies who would recognise this and say, yeah, that's pretty much how we've adapted the way to work. So this is a potential adaptation of the HR model. But I think the world now, being more turbulent, calls for more. Where this comes from is looking at the possibilities that the pandemic crisis and all of our reactions to that have given us, and the kind of reactions that we had to make. So in 2021, I conducted some research with a small team where we looked at thought leadership, research pieces. So we kind of took in 40 or 50 pieces of research and projected futures to try and make sense of what 2021 was going to be like into 2022. And one of the things we looked at was a skills agenda. And on here, what we can see is that there are 10 key areas of skill that HR and leaders were being asked to acquire and develop and utilise. So I won't read them all out, but there's a mix of things like psychology, analytics, design, science, coding, and agility. So that was the 2021 version of the skill set, I suppose you'd say, for our profession. But let's have a look at the 2023 version. So this is hot off the press, only just being compiled, again, from sources across the world, looking at the HR and people profession. And as we can see, if we zoom in here on the 2021 version, we can now see the 2023 version has shifted. We have some new elements, top being multifaceted leadership. I guess we see the crises, the turbulence and the uncertainty, and we realise we have to get more leadership engaged in a different way. But some of the things are the same: data, some sciences, wellness, behavioural analytics. And so there's some similarities here. So the 2023 skills do have a continuation from 21, but they are teaching us to look at something different. Now, this model was something that I conceived in 2021 when we were starting to think about what is it about work that goes beyond engagement, that goes into more inclusive belonging and a sense of real purpose. So this model gives us a sense of looking how people can achieve a state of flourishing. Now, again, I won't go through every element of this, but it starts with 2 exchanges of value, what values you have as an individual and what value the company needs to create. And through systems and energy and all sorts of components that HR has a lot to do with in terms of building products and services, we get to a state of flourishing. Now, what I did was mapped some of those skills to this model. to give us a sense of where does HR play most strongly in these areas and these elements, and what skills and capabilities does HR need in order to help people find their place as a state of flourishing. So we can see people science, we can see people analytics, we can see practice leads, product management, all sorts of skills that are potentially quite new to the HR world. But let's zoom into the way that might look as a model. So staying with 4 zones, but changing the dynamics of them. Products, people, systems, and processes. People operations, practice leads, psychologists, relationship brokers, performance analytics, product management, systems design, relationship brokering, and meaning makers. These are all new elements and components that we don't currently have necessarily set as jobs and roles within HR. And so if we map those zones and we bring those roles in, at the heart of it really is people who can create a sense of connection to the meaning of the organisation and the relationships that are needed for people to work well together. And they're supported by strong people operations, very fluent in technology, very hot on process, very keen on efficiency, who are then working with practice leads and coaches in areas like employee relations and in areas like pay modelling and systems. They are then supported in systems design, in performance analytics, and in the science of people in order to create more powerful services and support for people through products that HR builds. So this is the real shift, I guess, we're advocating here, that this is an HR kind of 3.0 for Web 3.0 world, and a world of work 3.0 perhaps. Now we can unpack some of these, and so let's just zoom in to a couple of them as an illustration. So if you're a systems designer, you will use the organization's reason for being, its vision, its model, its narrative, and its criteria for success to create org design, to create process design, to create performance infrastructure, and to create the operating system manual. So we can see from this that there are a number of things that people in these roles will use, and they will then create a whole new sense of what work looks like. So this is where we could shift and move things like people operations, things like coaching, things like analytics, and things like people science. So we have a real opportunity to change the world of HR, people, and culture. And so Accenture recently published their report, The CEO as a Growth Executive. So I think there's something in there about the powerhouse of growth, not just being product, service, and capital, but people. Gartner have set out their major trends and priorities. Scarce talent, economic pressure, global supply constraints means change, leader effectiveness, employee experience. At the heart of it is the HR function and the chief HR officer. So we've got some real opportunities to remodel. That's the vision that I think we could move to, with 4 zones of product, systems, people, and processes, new roles, new dynamics, new fluidity. And so some reference points on here, if we can zoom into those. We can see the Accenture report, we can see the Gartner priorities report, we can read up on Josh Bersin's take on full stack HR, we can look at McKinsey's 5 HR operating models, and we can look at Dave Ulrich's work on integrated human capability. So what we see here is a convergence of theory, and it's down to you as practitioners to be excited by this, to want to work in this, to experiment, to adapt, to just test, learn, and iterate and build the future. But let's hope that HR 3.0 is a much more powerful, impactful, and flourishing place to be for you as people professionals. And that's me completed. So thank you very much for entertaining me on video, not in person. I hope you had a fantastic conference. More about how to get in touch with me and us is here. But it's been a pleasure to talk to you about the future, and I hope that gives you some inspiration to come. Many thanks.